Hey everyone, today we're going to be beginning unit number 2, which is population and migration, seeing where in the world people are living, where they're settling, right? How people are dispersed around the planet. And we're also going to be looking at population growth and even decline around the world and what kind of things cause those situations. So, to begin with, this first set of notes, we're looking at population distribution, where people are distributed, where they're living at, okay, how they're spread out across the world. So, as you can see by this quick little map here, right, a lot of people are living um, in this kind of region right here, pretty close to the equator just because of the climate being better. We'll get a little bit more into that eventually. For now, I got a few vocab terms you want to make sure that you are understanding for this unit. The first one being density. Okay, population density is just how much of something exists in a certain area. Typically in this class, we're going to be talking population density, so how many people live in a given area. But density can be used to pretty much talk about anything, right? It could be sheep per square mile, it could be whatever. Um, so density is simply the number of something in an area. Concentration is how packed together or spread out something might be. We call it clustered or dispersed. So if something is clustered together, it's tightly packed, versus if something is dispersed, that means it's spread out. There's not a lot of people packed tightly together. Um, and then the other vocab term is pattern. So if there are geometric patterns involved with the settlement or the layout of a certain place, sometimes we do see that as well. Okay. Um, Taking a look at just kind of this being visualized, right? Density, right? You have a higher density in in this one down here. You can see that there's 12 houses in that one little, let's call it a square mile, versus the top picture where there's only 6 houses in that square mile. All right, so that's all you have to do for figuring out density. We're going to get more into the 3 different specific types of density in a future set of notes, but for today, we'll keep it simple here. Concentration then, like we mentioned, right, is it spread out? In this case, this would be a dispersed concentration versus clustered, where they're closer together. And then you see a couple examples of patterns, okay? What I want to show next is just some examples of places in the world that represent these vocabulary terms. Start out with this first one, which is in India. A lot of places in India, just because of their population, not everybody can live in, suburban 2-story homes and stuff like that. A lot of places, when you have over 1 billion people living in India, odds are there's going to be a lot of places that look like this where people are living like on top of each other, right? It is tightly packed together. It's highly clustered and very, very densely populated, okay? Here's another example of dense population, but this one is much more like carefully organized and well planned. This is a district of Mexico City, the capital. Um, it's a very geometric looking pattern. As you can see, it's like a perfect octagon. Everything has a very geometric layout. Okay. Again, still clustered, still densely packed, but not to the extent that we saw in this previous photo. All right. You can see here's New York City. You could pretty much choose just about any large, huge urban center in the world, whether it's London or Tokyo or wherever. You can see it's very densely packed together, highly clustered concentration. Okay. Then on the other hand, there are a lot of places that look like this, especially in rural parts of Wisconsin. This is from my hometown of Howards Grove, Wisconsin. It's a aerial view, a satellite image. Okay, so you can see that it's very spread out. It's farmland mostly. It's very rural, and so not dense at all. A very dispersed concentration of people, a low concentration. Okay, another example of a densely packed area. This is Hong Kong. And so sometimes when you're looking at a country's population density, you can see that some parts have very concentrated, clustered population centers, while other parts are very spread out. You can see here with Australia, Australia is mostly just one big desert. So you're not going to find a lot of people living in the desert, so it's going to be very dispersed, um, low population density in this area. And then coastal areas is where it gets more clustered together because that's where people are able to live. Okay, you can do that for just about any country. Some countries you're going to see with um, high levels of concentration throughout the entire country, um, but that's not super common unless it's a really tiny country size-wise. Okay, so just a quick little map here. This is kind of fascinating. We can see this little circle on this map, and there are more people living just in this circle than the entire rest of this map. All right, and um, just within that little region, right? We can break it down into sub-regions in this case, right? We have East Asia, we have South Asia, then we have Southeast Asia, um, and that makes up a huge chunk of the world's population, just right there. Okay, so I want us to look just kind of briefly at these four concentration, like centers of population concentration in the world. So taking a look at the first one is East Asia, with a quarter of the world's population coming from just these few countries. Now, most of this is made up of just China, right? China's population, it has approaching 1.5 billion people, 1.5 billion with a B, right? That's a lot of people living in just this area. Now, it is very spread out. There's not a lot of density in this area, but if you went along the coast of China, that's where you have probably 1 billion people living like right here, while the other 500 million is spread out throughout the rest of the entire landmass. Okay. Then you have South Asia. It's the second largest concentration. Again, another 25% just about of the world's population living just in these few countries. Now, India is far and away the biggest population in this particular sub-region, right? You've got over 1 billion people living in just India. So you can see you put these two places together, right? Between China and India, you've got pushing 3 billion people almost when the world's population is only 7 billion. So a little over 7 billion now. The third largest concentration would be Europe, just the entire mass of Europe, which is made up of almost 50 different countries together, right? Combines to form 1/9 of the world's population or so. And then lastly, Southeast Asia brings up number 4 in the world's concentration list. So you got 600 million people living just in this little area of the world. And most of that is simply because of Indonesia's humongous population. Indonesia is made up of I can't remember, I think 11,000 islands. And so if each of those islands has, a couple 100,000 people on it, you're talking some pretty big numbers pretty quickly. Okay? Why are so many people living in India and China specifically? What's the history behind that? Take a look at that video if you want to. I think it's kind of an interesting, quick little overview of why that's the case. So we're looking at where in the world people are living. We also have to take a look at where they're not living. So where we are living is what's known as the ecumene. It's a very fancy vocab word, right? Ecumene. It's the parts of the world that are considered suitable for people to live. So livable areas, places that have enough resources, whether that be water or food availability, or just a suitable climate for people to live, right? So we're taking a look at the places that are livable, but the places that aren't are called, well, it's not part of the ecumene then, right? But these places, the top 4 areas that are not livable really are dry areas, places that are too wet, places that are too cold, and places that are too high in elevation to sustain people. So I'm not going to go really in depth on it. You can kind of take a look through each of these slides if you'd like to. Just know that people aren't living in the deserts, right? Typically speaking, they're not living in areas that have too much water. We're not living in areas that are too cold to sustain life, right? The Arctic regions, the polar regions of the world. You can't grow crops there very well. You can't really sustain life when it's too cold. And then lastly is highlands. Okay, people aren't really living in mountainous areas at the same rates that they live in lowland areas. Okay, and so if we take a look here in the United States, here's just a really quick little look or a little overview of the biggest population clusters or the most concentrated parts of the United States. If we break it down just by, well, this is actually broken down by county, but if you look, the number one most concentrated area is New York City. That probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone that that's the most concentrated urban center of the United States. Then you have Los Angeles, which is out in California, obviously. Then you've got Chicago. You have Miami down in Florida. And then lastly, you have Houston, which is in Texas. And so those are some of the biggest population clusters here in the United States. Notice that all of those locations are coastal, right? They border some sort of body of water. It helps to sustain life. Water is life. So, just basically taking a look here, right, you notice that all the concentration clusters around the world do typically come in areas that are coastal. We also notice that there's a trend of which latitudes we're living in. Typically speaking, it's going to be latitudes that promote a climate that is good and suitable for growing crops and for having plenty of water and other resource availability. So that is basically just your quick overview. Make sure you get those key vocab terms written down and be on the lookout for additional information about population growth, population density, specific examples and things like that. So that's in the week or two that are coming up. So take care, guys.